them. Democratic member of the House Oversight Committee, Congressman Subramanyam of Virginia, is with us now. Congressman, it's good to have you here. The Democrats tell us that the committee got 95,000 plus images. Just 19 were released today. Can you help us understand what went into the discussions to release these specific pictures? Like, how are you going through these materials?
Yeah, so first, we've only gone through about a fourth of the 95,000 images and documents. So there's a lot more to be found. But certainly, these 19, I think, paint a picture of a couple of things. One, they show us that all these rich and powerful men, Democrats and Republicans, who were rumored to be associated with Jeffrey Epstein, were found in pictures in Jeffrey Epstein's estate. That's where these pictures and images are coming from. Jeffrey Epstein kept these in his estate. And so the second thing is, Donald Trump keeps saying that he didn't know anything about Jeffrey Epstein's crimes when he knew Jeffrey Epstein. Yeah, here he is once again with many women. We don't know if they're victims or not, so that's why we blocked their faces. But again, Donald Trump keeps coming up. And former Prince Andrew, now Andrew, keeps coming up. Some of these other folks keep coming up. And so this is more evidence of some of the associations that Jeffrey Epstein had with rich and powerful men.
But there is no context surrounding them, right? So, for example, we don't even know, were these pictures taken after he was a convicted sex offender? So should there be concerned about maybe guilt by association or people taking implications away from that aren't necessarily fair?
We're trying to piece some of this together, but again, this is not like it's the first time Donald Trump or Bill Gates or even Steve Bannon has been mentioned side by side with Jeffrey Epstein. And so it's very important to understand that every single time we get documents released from the Epstein estate, we keep seeing the same names over and over again. Now we're seeing images. There was even a picture of a Donald Trump branded condom, right? And Jeffrey Epstein not only had those, but he took a picture of them and kept it all, and it was in his estate all these years. And so the context that is most important to me is the fact that the Epstein estate had these pictures, these professionally taken pictures of him and his associates and colleagues who have been rumored to be associated with him for a long time.
There was also some concerns raised about some of the women who, again, their faces were blurred, but they may be able to recognize themselves, or people who they knew around that time may be able to recognize them. What were the conversations surrounding trying to be as specific as you can about not re-traumatizing these survivors and their families?
Right, yeah, that's been a high priority for us. And that's why we've been in contact with the victims' families and the victims themselves to make sure that when we're releasing photos and files, when we're releasing documents, that we redact them when they wish to be redacted. In some cases, like last time, Virginia Giuffre, we actually saw that the Trump administration unredacted her name. And so we don't want to do that. We don't want to out victims or have victims come forward through our process. So we're going to continue to be vigilant about that. In the end, though, these documents were not part of the DOJ documents. This is just the estate. And this is a subpoena that's 4 months old that the Trump administration hasn't responded to. And so they have till next week to follow the law now because he signed that bill. And so we're very interested to see that. This is only the tip of the iceberg. So people need to recognize that.
Well, there was also a comment that was made by your colleague, Robert Garcia, who suggested that there are some of these powerful people that the committee might want to talk to. You're a lawyer, and so you understand how investigations work. Who would you still like to speak to? What do you think are the clear questions that the American people have a right to get an answer to, and from whom?
Some of these names come up over and over again, and so I want to talk to the people who visited his island. I want to talk to the people who visited his mansion over and over again, and I certainly want to talk to anyone who has information about the inner workings of Epstein's crimes and his criminal ring. And so we have, Ghislaine Maxwell is a serial liar. She's not told us the truth. She's not a reliable witness, but we want to talk to some of these other folks like Andrew. I want the Clintons to come forward. I want everyone to come forward who has information about Jeffrey Epstein. And so that's why we've agreed to subpoenaing many of these folks, and we're going to continue to try to get as much information as possible. That's what any lawyer would do in a situation like this.
The Epstein estate has been producing records to comply with the subpoena on a rolling basis, if I'm correct, Congressman. What else do you expect to obtain, and how quickly?
So we've actually continued to push the banks and the financial institutions to release the files that they have on Jeffrey Epstein. The victims told us that these financial documents tell a story of his crimes. His business dealings were intertwined with his crimes and his personal life. And so we have to make sure that we have those. I think they are going to be very, very important to our investigation. And then the Epstein estate has more documents, too. They've been very cooperative with us to date, and we have more to go with this batch right now, 75% left to go through. And we want to make sure that we have all the information and that we release all the information as publicly as we can while still protecting the victims.
Let me just ask you before I let you go, I know that you're going to continue to release some of these photos. Do you have a sense of how long it will take you to go through the remaining 3/4 of them and make decisions about what else should be released publicly?
It's a lot, as soon as possible. And we have a great team on the Oversight Committee working through them. I'm hoping in the next week we can get everything we need to be able to release what we need to the public at that point.
Congressman Subramanyam, thank you so much for coming on the program and helping us understand